When the paramedics loaded my wife and into the ambulance, they were still connected in a way that defied both nature and dignity. The entire neighborhood watched in horror as two people were wheeled out under a single sheet, screaming in agony. And to think it all started because I swapped a tube of luxury lubricant for industrial-strength marine epoxy. If you think that sounds cruel, wait until you hear what they were planning to do to me. I am Harry Caldwell, and this is the story of how a $12 tube of glue saved my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Harry Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and I have lived in Austin, Texas my whole life. I spent 40 years as a general contractor, building half the foundations in this county. I know how to pour concrete so it lasts 100 years, and I know how to spot a crack in a structure before the whole thing comes down. But it seems I was not looking closely enough at the foundation of my own house. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and my lower back was throbbing with that familiar dull ache that comes when the humidity rises. It is the price you pay for 4 decades of lifting lumber and bending over blueprints. I went into the master bathroom looking for my prescription anti-inflammatory pills. Usually I keep them in the medicine cabinet, but the shelf was empty. I remembered Patricia mentioning she had tidied up the bathroom earlier that morning. Patricia is my wife. She is 58 years old, which makes her 12 years younger than me. We have been married for 20 years. Lately, she has been obsessed with appearing younger. She spends hours at the gym, or so she says, and hundreds of dollars on creams and treatments. She tells me it is for her health, but I have my doubts. I looked around the bathroom and saw her gym bag sitting on the vanity counter. It was unzipped slightly. I figured she might have swept my pill bottle into her bag by mistake when she was rushing to her yoga class. I reached into the bag, expecting to feel the plastic of the pill bottle or maybe a damp towel from her workout. Instead, my hand brushed against something silky. I pulled it out. It was a pair of bright red lace panties. Not the cotton ones she wears around the house. These were crotchless. The kind of thing you see in catalogs that arrive in brown paper envelopes. I held them up, staring at the intricate lace. Patricia has not worn anything like this for me in over a decade. In fact, for the last 3 years, our bedroom has been as dead as a ghost town. She always had an excuse. She would say, "Harry, I am going through menopause," or "Harry, you are an old man, let us just get some sleep." She made me feel like a pervert for even trying to touch my own wife. She made me feel like I was withered and useless. But here in my hand was proof that her libido was not dead. It just was not directed at me. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I dug deeper into the bag. Underneath the red lace, I found a box of Magnum condoms, half empty, and next to it was a sleek black tube. I picked it up and read the label. Velvet Touch, premium warming lubricant. I stood there in the silence of my own bathroom, freezing. The irony was bitter. She told me she was dry. She told me her body had shut down. Yet here she was, carrying a tube of high-end lubricant in her gym bag, along with lingerie that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. I should have been angry. I should have been screaming and throwing things. But 40 years in construction teaches you one thing. When you find a problem, you do not panic. You assess the damage. You look for the cause. I brought the bag closer to my face. I expected the smell of sweat, or maybe the lavender scent of the yoga studio she claimed to visit 3 times a week. But there was no sweat. The bag smelled of perfume. Her expensive Chanel mixed with something else. A musky, woodsy scent. I knew that smell. It was cheap cologne. The kind you buy at the drugstore when you want to smell like a rich man, but do not have the wallet for it. It smelled like cedarwood and desperation. It hit me like a sledgehammer. I knew exactly who wore that cologne. Gary. Gary was a real estate agent here in town. He was 45 years old, with a smile that showed too many teeth and a handshake that was always a little too damp. 10 years ago, when Gary was just starting out and nobody would give him the time of day, I loaned him $50,000 to start his agency. I treated him like a son. I sent business his way. I introduced him to my contacts. I remembered the last time Gary came over for a barbecue. He had clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Harry, you are the salt of the earth." He had looked me in the eye and thanked me for everything. And all the while he must have been wearing this same cheap cologne while looking at my wife. My hands were shaking, but not from age. They were shaking with a cold, hard rage. I looked at the receipt tucked into the side pocket of the bag. It was a reservation confirmation. The Magnolia Motel, room 104, this coming Friday afternoon. The Magnolia is a sleazy place on the outskirts of town. The kind of place that rents rooms by the hour and does not ask for ID. So that was their plan. A cheap thrill in a cheap motel while I sat at home thinking my wife was at a charity fundraiser. Suddenly I heard the front door open downstairs, the click of heels on the hardwood floor. Patricia was home. "Harry, are you home?" she called out. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful. The voice of a woman who thinks she has gotten away with murder. I had a split second to decide what to do. I could confront her right now. I could wave the red panties in her face and demand a divorce. I could throw Gary's name at her and watch her crumble. But then I remembered something else. Last week, Patricia had been pushing me to sign a new power of attorney document. She said it was just in case something happened to my health. She said, "Harry, you are 70 now, and you are getting a little forgetful. We need to protect your assets." She had looked so concerned, so loving. Now looking at the condoms and the lube, I realized it was not love. It was a strategy. She did not just want to cheat on me. She wanted to take control. She wanted to sideline me. If I confronted her now, she would play the victim. She would say I was paranoid. She would say I was a jealous old man losing his mind. She might even use my outburst to prove I was mentally unstable. No, I would not give her that satisfaction. I quickly put the tube of Velvet Touch back into the bag. I stuffed the red panties underneath it. I zipped the bag up exactly as I had found it. I took a deep breath and looked in the mirror. I saw a 70-year-old face with deep lines and gray hair, but the eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who had negotiated million-dollar contracts and survived job sites that would break weaker men. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. "Harry, are you up there?" she called again. I opened the medicine cabinet and grabbed a bottle of aspirin. I turned just as Patricia walked into the bedroom. She stopped when she saw me standing next to her gym bag. For a second, her mask slipped. I saw genuine panic flash in her eyes. Her gaze darted to the bag, then back to my face. "Oh, Harry, you startled me," she said, putting a hand to her chest. "What are you doing in here?" I kept my face completely blank. I held up the bottle of aspirin. "Just looking for my back pills, Patty," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "That old injury is flaring up again. I thought maybe I left them on the counter." She rushed forward and grabbed the gym bag, pulling it away from me. She hugged it to her chest defensively. "You know I do not like you digging through my personal things, Harry," she said, her voice sharp. "It is just sweaty gym clothes in there. You do not want to touch that. It is gross." I looked at her. She was wearing a white dress that cost $500. Her hair was perfectly styled. There was not a drop of sweat on her. "You are right, dear," I said, scratching my head and adding a slight tremor to my hand, playing the part she wanted me to play. The part of the old, confused husband. I must have misplaced them. I am getting so forgetful lately, just like you said. She relaxed visibly. A smug smile touched the corners of her lips. She thought she was safe. She thought she was smarter than the old contractor. "Why do you not go downstairs and watch your television shows, Harry?" she said, patting my arm with a condescending touch. "I will take a shower, and then I will make you some soup. You look tired." "I am tired, Patty," I said. I am very tired. I walked out of the bedroom and headed down the stairs. As I walked away, I heard the bathroom door lock behind her. She was probably checking the bag, making sure everything was still in place. I went into the kitchen, but I did not turn on the television. Instead, I walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the garage. My garage is my sanctuary. It is filled with tools I have collected over 40 years. Saws, drills, hammers, and shelves full of solvents and adhesives. I stood in front of my workbench. I thought about the last 20 years. I thought about the house I built for her, the cars I bought her, the way I paid off her debts when we first met. I thought about Gary, the man I helped when he was nothing. They thought I was a clueless old man. They thought they could use my money to fund their affair and then toss me aside like a broken tool. My eyes scanned the shelves until they landed on a specific tube. It was a gray tube with black lettering. Marine epoxy. It is an industrial adhesive used for bonding boat hulls. It is waterproof, heat-resistant, and once it cures, it is harder than concrete. It sets in 5 minutes. I looked at the tube of epoxy, and then I thought about the tube of velvet touch upstairs in her bag. A plan began to form in my mind. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was absolutely ruthless. If she wanted things to go smoothly with Gary, I was going to make sure they stuck together. Literally. I grabbed the marine epoxy and a syringe from my toolbox. I put them in my pocket. I went back inside the house. I could hear the shower running upstairs. She was washing away the scent of her betrayal, preparing for her next lie. I sat down in my recliner and waited. I waited with the patience of a man who knows that the concrete has to set before you can build the walls. She wanted to play games. Fine, we would play. But she forgot one thing. I wrote the rule book on building traps, and Friday at the Magnolia Motel I was going to bring the whole house down on top of them. And the best part was, she handed me the blueprint. I closed my eyes and listened to the water running. Friday was 3 days away. I had time. Time to prepare. Time to make sure that when they finally came together, it would be a union they would never forget. The game was on, and old Harry Caldwell was just getting started. The air in the garage was cool and smelled of sawdust and old motor oil. This was my sanctuary. This was where I fixed things. For 40 years, people paid me to come into their broken homes and make them whole again. I fixed sagging roofs. I shored up cracking foundations. I smoothed over the rough edges that time and neglect had worn down. But standing there in front of my metal workbench, I knew that what was broken upstairs in my bedroom could not be fixed with a hammer or a nail. I looked at the wall of tools. There were saws that could cut through solid oak in seconds. There were drills that could pierce steel. For a fleeting moment, a dark and violent thought crossed my mind. It would be so easy to take a sledgehammer to that Lexus she loved so much. It would be easy to storm back upstairs and tear that bag apart and scream until the windows rattled. But that is what a weak man would do. That is what a man with no control would do, and Patricia expected me to be weak. She expected me to be the confused old man who could barely find his aspirin. If I exploded now, she would just use it against me. She would tell the judge I was unstable. She would tell Gary that I was dangerous. They would commit me to a home and sell my house before the ink was dry on the papers. No. I needed something else. I needed a solution that was elegant in its cruelty. I needed a punishment that fit the crime. My eyes scanned the rows of solvents and adhesives on the top shelf. I had everything up there from wood glue to contact cement. But I needed something stronger, something permanent. Then I saw it. Tucked behind a can of paint thinner was a gray tube with bold black lettering. Marine epoxy. I had used this stuff 5 years ago when I repaired the hull of my fishing boat. It is not like regular glue. It is designed to bond fiberglass and steel underwater. It is designed to withstand high pressure and extreme heat. Once this stuff sets, it does not let go. You have to grind it off or cut it out. It is waterproof. It is chemical-proof. It is essentially liquid concrete. I took the tube down and weighed it in my hand. It felt heavy. Cold. I read the warning label on the back. Danger. Causes severe skin irritation. Bonds in 5 minutes. Do not use on skin. Seek medical attention immediately if contact occurs. A grim smile touched my lips. Patricia wanted to play dirty. She wanted to humiliate me. Well, this was going to be the ultimate humiliation. I moved quickly. I grabbed a large plastic syringe from my toolbox, the kind I used to inject wood glue into termite holes. I grabbed a pair of latex gloves and a roll of paper towels. I checked my watch. The water was still running upstairs. Patricia takes long showers. She likes to scrub away the world and pretend she is a queen in a spa. That gave me maybe 10 minutes. I slipped the epoxy and the syringe into my pocket and walked back into the house. The floorboards creaked under my boots, but the sound of the shower masked my approach. I climbed the stairs one by one, careful not to make a sound. The bedroom was empty. The steam from the bathroom was curling out from under the door, carrying the scent of her expensive lavender body wash. It made me sick. I walked over to the vanity where the gym bag sat. I unzipped it with surgical precision. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not out of fear, but out of a strange, cold excitement. This was a job. This was a demolition project. I took out the black tube of Velvet Touch lubricant. It felt sleek and expensive in my rough hand. I unscrewed the cap. I took the empty syringe and inserted the tip into the nozzle of the lube tube. I pulled the plunger back slowly, sucking out the clear silicone fluid. It came out easily. I emptied the syringe into a wad of paper towels I had shoved in my pocket. I did this 3 times until the tube was flat and empty. Now came the hard part. I took out the marine epoxy. I carefully squeezed the thick gray paste into the back of the syringe. It was viscous and heavy. It looked almost exactly like the lubricant, but it smelled faintly of chemicals. I inserted the syringe back into the empty lube tube and pushed the plunger. I forced the industrial adhesive inside, filling the void where the lubricant had been. I watched the tube puff back up, returning to its original shape. It was perfect. To the naked eye, it looked exactly the same. But inside it was a weapon. I cleaned the nozzle with the corner of my shirt, making sure there was no residue on the threads. I screwed the cap back on tight. I held the tube up to the light. It looked innocent. It looked like a promise of pleasure. But I knew what was inside. I knew that the moment this substance touched body heat and moisture, it would begin a chemical reaction that would fuse human skin together like 2 pieces of welded steel. If she wanted things to go smoothly with Gary, I was going to make sure they got the exact opposite. If she wanted to be joined with him, I would give her a union she could never escape. I would give her a bond that would require a team of surgeons to break. I placed the tube back into the bag. I tucked the red lace panties over it, just like I had found them. I zipped the bag shut. I checked the room. No drops of glue. No paper towels. No sign that I had ever been there. I walked back out into the hall just as the water turned off. I made it to the top of the stairs before the bathroom door opened. I leaned against the railing, breathing steadily, forcing my face into a mask of tired indifference. Patricia stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a fluffy white towel. Her skin was pink from the heat. Her hair was wrapped in a turban. She looked fresh and clean and completely oblivious. She saw me standing there and stopped. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "I thought you were downstairs, Harry," she said, tightening the towel around her chest. "I was just checking the thermostat." I said, my voice raspy and old. "It feels a little chilly in here, do you not think?" She rolled her eyes. "It is 72 degrees, Harry. It is perfectly fine. You are just getting old, and your blood is thin. Go sit down before you fall down." She walked past me, trailing that lavender scent. She was humming a little tune. I recognized it. It was a love song from the radio. She was happy. She was thinking about Friday. She was thinking about Gary and the motel room and the red panties. She had no idea that the bag she was reaching for contained a time bomb. She had no idea that the husband she dismissed as a useless relic had just engineered her destruction. I watched her walk into the bedroom and close the door. "You are right, Patty," I whispered to the closed door. "I am old, but I still know how to build a trap." I went downstairs and turned on the television. I sat in my chair and stared at the screen, but I did not see the news. I saw the future. I saw Friday. And for the first time in months, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who knows he has already won the war before the first shot has even been fired. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised peach and humidity that made your shirt stick to your back the moment you stepped outside. I was sitting at the kitchen table nursing a cup of black coffee when Patricia walked in. If she was going to a real estate seminar, she was certainly the best-dressed student in the class. She wore a tailored navy blue suit with a skirt that hit just above the knee and a silk scarf tied effortlessly around her neck. Her hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde perfection, and she smelled like she had bathed in Chanel No. 5. She looked expensive. She looked like the trophy wife she always wanted to be. I watched her over the rim of my mug. She was bustling around the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water and checking her reflection in the microwave door. She was vibrating with energy. It was not the nervous energy of someone lying. It was the excited energy of a woman going on a date. "Harry, I am heading out," she said, flashing me a bright smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "The traffic to Houston is going to be a nightmare if I do not leave now." Houston. That was the lie. She claimed there was a 2-day seminar on commercial property management. She said she wanted to help me manage our rental units better since I was getting too old to handle the stress. It was a good lie. It made her sound responsible. It made her sound like a dutiful wife picking up the slack for her failing husband. "That is good, Patty," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. "You drive safe now. Those highways are dangerous." She walked over to me. She did not lean down to kiss me on the lips. Instead, she placed a hand on my shoulder and kissed my forehead. It was the kind of kiss you give a child before you drop them off at daycare. It was the kind of kiss you give an invalid who does not know what day of the week it is. "I left your lunch in the fridge," she said, patting my cheek. "And Harry, do not forget to take your brain supplements." I put them right next to the coffee maker. "We do not want you wandering off again, do we?" I had never wandered off in my life. But that was part of her narrative now. She was planting the seeds, making sure that if I ever tried to speak up against her, people would just think it was the dementia talking. "I will take them, dear," I said, forcing a weak smile. "You have fun in Houston. Learn a lot." "Oh, I will," she said with a wink. "I will." She grabbed her gym bag, the one containing the time bomb I had planted, and headed for the door. I listened to the heavy thud of the door closing and the click of the lock. I heard her heels clicking down the driveway to her Lexus. The engine purred to life. It was a smooth, expensive sound. I paid $80,000 for that car 3 years ago because she said her old Mercedes was embarrassing. I waited until the sound of the engine faded down the street. Then I stood up. I walked to the sink and poured the rest of my coffee down the drain. I was done playing the feeble old man. I went out the back door to the detached garage. My truck was waiting there. It is a 1990 Ford F-150. The paint is peeling on the hood, and there is a dent in the rear bumper from a job site mishap back in '98. Patricia hates this truck. She calls it a rust bucket. She refuses to ride in it. She says it smells like sawdust and old men. But this truck has never let me down. It starts every time. It hauls whatever I put in the bed. And most importantly, it blends in. Nobody looks twice at an old pickup truck in Texas. It is just part of the landscape. I climbed into the cab. The seat was worn leather, cracked in places, but comfortable. I turned the key and the engine roared to life with a familiar rumble. I backed out of the garage and headed down the street, keeping a safe distance. I knew the route to the highway, but I also knew she was not going to the highway. I stayed 2 cars back. She drove confidently, weaving through the morning traffic. She did not take the on-ramp for Interstate 10 toward Houston. Instead, she turned left, heading toward the upscale district on the west side of town, the domain of young professionals and overpriced coffee shops. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. I knew exactly where she was going. She pulled into the circular driveway of the Overlook. It is a luxury apartment complex with a concierge and a rooftop pool. The kind of place where rent costs more than most people's mortgage. I pulled my truck into a side street and cut the engine. I watched through the windshield. A minute later, the glass doors of the lobby opened. A man walked out. It was Gary. Seeing him in the flesh made my stomach turn. He was wearing a slim-fit suit that looked too tight and sunglasses that cost too much. He was carrying a leather weekender bag. He walked with a swagger that said he owned the world. I watched as my wife popped the trunk of her Lexus. Gary threw his bag in next to hers. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Before he got in, he leaned down and kissed her. It was not a forehead kiss. It was a long, hungry kiss right there in the open. I felt a bile rise in my throat. I looked at Gary, and I did not see the successful real estate agent. I saw the scared kid who came to my office 10 years ago. I remembered him sitting in my chair, sweating through his cheap shirt. He had told me he was broke. He told me he had a vision for a real estate firm, but no bank would touch him. He had looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "Mr. Caldwell, you are the only one who believes in me. If you help me, I promise I will make you proud." I had written him a check for $50,000 that day. It was my personal savings. I told him to pay me back when he could. I told him I saw potential in him. I invited him to my home for Thanksgiving because he said he had no family in town. And this was how he repaid me. By using the success I funded to steal my wife. By using the money I helped him make to buy the cheap cologne that now stained my wife's car. They were laughing as he got into the car. I could see their silhouettes through the rear window. Patricia reached over and touched his leg. They pulled out of the driveway and turned right, heading away from the city center. I waited a count of 10 and then pulled out behind them. We drove for 40 minutes. They headed north away from the suburbs and into the scrubby hill country that surrounds Austin. The houses got fewer and farther between. The strip malls gave way to old gas stations and empty fields. They turned off the main road onto a gravel drive marked by a faded neon sign. The Magnolia Motel. It was the kind of place you go when you do not want to be found. Single-story units arranged in a U-shape around a parking lot that had more weeds than asphalt. The paint was peeling off the doors. An ice machine hummed loudly in the corner. It was cheap. It was secluded. It was perfect for dirty secrets. Patricia parked the Lexus in front of room 104. It looked out of place there like a diamond in a gutter. I drove past the entrance and parked my truck behind an abandoned diner across the street. I grabbed my binoculars and a baseball cap, pulling the brim low over my eyes. I walked across the road, keeping to the shadows of the trees. I walked into the motel office. The lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. A young man with headphones around his neck was behind the counter, barely looking up from his phone. "I need a room," I said, keeping my head down. $70 a night, he mumbled. "Cash or card?" "Cash," I said, sliding the bills across the counter. "I want room 105. He looked up, then confused. "Why that one? We got nicer ones in the back." "I like the view," I said flatly. He shrugged and tossed a key onto the counter. "Checkout is at 11. No loud parties." I took the key and walked out. Room 105 was directly across the parking lot from room 104. I had a front row seat. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was dark and musty. The curtains were drawn. I did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to the window and peered through the crack in the curtains. I saw them. Gary was taking the bags out of the trunk. Patricia was standing by the door of room 104 unlocking it. She looked excited. She looked like a teenager sneaking out. Gary walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, nuzzling her neck. She giggled and leaned back into him. They stumbled into the room together and the door clicked shut. I stood there in the dark, clutching the curtain. I could imagine what was happening inside. I could imagine the bags being unzipped. I could imagine Patricia reaching for that black tube, thinking it was going to make everything perfect. I pulled a chair over to the window and sat down. I checked my watch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. The show was about to begin. I was not just a spectator anymore. I was the director. And the final act was going to be explosive. I watched the closed door of room 104. The Do Not Disturb sign was already hanging on the knob. "You are not going to need that sign," I whispered to myself. "In a few minutes, the whole world is going to be disturbed." I settled in and waited for the screaming to start. I sat in the darkness of room 105 with the heavy curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. The air conditioner rattled in the window unit, fighting a losing battle against the Texas heat, but I barely noticed the temperature. I reached into my canvas tool bag and pulled out a device I had not used in 15 years. It was not a doctor's stethoscope with a cold metal disc. This was a specialized acoustic listening device used by plumbers and contractors to find leaks behind solid walls or identify termites eating through support beams. It looked more like a mechanic's tool with a sensitive diaphragm and a heavy set of industrial headphones. I had bought it back in the 90s when I was working on a high-end renovation in downtown Austin. The client had a water leak somewhere behind a wall of imported Italian marble, and he refused to let me break any tiles until I knew exactly where the pipe had burst. This tool had saved me thousands of dollars then. Today, it was going to save my life. I pulled the cheap laminate dresser away from the shared wall. The construction of the Magnolia Motel was exactly what I expected, yet from a place that charged $70 a night. It was wood frame construction with minimal insulation and a single layer of half-inch drywall separating the units. Acoustically speaking, it was like having a conversation through a sheet of paper. I put the headphones on and pressed the sensor against the painted drywall. At first, all I heard was the hum of their air conditioner and the muffled sound of footsteps. They were moving around the room. I heard the distinct sound of a zipper being pulled, but it was not the zipper of a dress or a pair of trousers. It was the heavy rasp of a luggage zipper. I adjusted the volume on the amplifier. I expected to hear the sounds of illicit passion. I expected giggles and whispers and the creaking of bedsprings. I had steeled myself for the pain of hearing my wife make love to another man. I thought that would be the knife in my heart. But what I heard next was not the sound of betrayal. It was the sound of a business transaction. "Did you bring it?" Gary's voice came through the headphones clear and sharp. He sounded impatient. Not hungry for her body, but hungry for something else. "I got it," Patricia replied. Her voice was steady, devoid of the nervous energy she had shown at home. I heard the rustle of stiff paper. High-quality bond paper. I pressed the sensor harder against the wall. "I got him to sign the power of attorney yesterday," she said. "I told him it was just an update for his insurance policy." The old fool did not even read it. He just signed where I pointed. He trusts me completely. It is pathetic, really. My blood ran cold. The power of attorney. She had been nagging me about that for weeks, saying it was for my protection in case I had a stroke or an accident. I had read the draft she showed me and it seemed standard. But now hearing her tone, I realized she must have swapped the pages or added clauses I missed. "So it is full control?" Gary asked. "Full control," Patricia confirmed. "Financial, medical, everything. As soon as we get back on Sunday, I am going to have him admitted." Admitted. The word hung in the air. "I found a place called Shady Acres over in East Austin," she continued. "It is a state-funded facility. It smells like bleach and boiled cabbage, but it is cheap. I spoke to the director. I told him Harry has been having violent episodes, dementia with aggression. With the power of attorney, I can have him committed for a 72-hour hold, and then we can extend it indefinitely. Once he is in the system, nobody listens to a crazy old man." I sat there in the dark, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. This was not just about sex. This was a hit job. She was not just planning to leave me. She was planning to erase me. She was going to lock me away in a warehouse for the dying while she lived off the fruits of my labor. "And the assets?" Gary asked. The greed in his voice was palpable. "I have the deeds right here," Patricia said. "The house in the suburbs, the rental duplexes on Lamar, and the big one, the 10 acres of commercial land down south." "Sell the land first," Gary said quickly. "I have a buyer lined up, a developer from Dallas. He is offering $2 million cash for a quick close. No inspections. $2 million. That land was my retirement. It was the nest egg I had held onto for 30 years, waiting for the right time to sell. It was worth 3 times that amount, but a quick fire sale would bring instant cash." "We can close in 2 weeks," Gary said. "Once the money hits the account, we transfer it to the Cayman Shell Company, and we are gone. By the time anyone realizes old Harry is not just senile but destitute, we will be sipping margaritas in Cabo." Cabo, Patricia giggled. It sounded girlish and grotesque. "I cannot wait to be rid of him, Gary. You have no idea what it is like. He smells like old sawdust and liniment. He is so boring. All he talks about is construction codes and the weather. I feel like I am living in a museum." I gripped the stethoscope so hard my knuckles turned white. Boring. She called me boring. I was the one who paid for her facelifts. I was the one who paid for her vacations. I was the one who held her hand when her mother died. And to her, I was just an ATM that had outlived its usefulness. But then I heard something else. Something in Gary's tone that Patricia missed because she was too busy counting her chickens. "We need that $2 million, Patty," Gary said, and his voice was tight. "I have investors who are getting impatient. If I do not pay them back by the first of the month, things are going to get ugly." Investors. I knew what that meant. Gary was not a savvy businessman. He was a gambler. I had heard rumors around town that he played high-stakes poker. If he needed $2 million fast, he was not investing it. He was paying off a debt to people who broke legs for a living. He was using her. He did not love her. He was drowning, and she was his life raft. He was going to take my money, pay off his debts, and likely leave her stranded in Mexico with nothing but a suitcase full of red lingerie. The irony was almost enough to make me laugh. She was destroying me to save a man who was going to destroy her. "Enough business," Gary said abruptly, the sound of papers being shuffled aside. "Put those away. We have 2 hours before I have to meet the contact. Let us make the most of it." "Oh, Gary," Patricia cooed. Her voice shifted instantly from cold calculator to seductive mistress. "I missed you so much. The old man has been clinging to me all week. I need you to scrub him off me." I heard the sound of clothes rustling, the belt buckle hitting the floor, the heavy thud of shoes being kicked off. "You brought the bag, right?" Gary asked. "Of course," Patricia whispered. "I brought everything. The outfit you like. And the other thing." I leaned forward. This was it. The moment the trap was sprung. "Where is it?" Gary asked, his voice thick with lust. "I want to try that premium stuff you talked about." The velvet touch. It is in the side pocket, Patricia said. Hand it to me. I heard the sound of a zipper, the sound of a plastic tube being handled. Here, baby, Gary said. Let me do it. No, let me. Patricia giggled. I want to make sure you are good and ready. I heard the cap unscrew. It was a small sound, but in my headphones it sounded like the click of a trigger being pulled. Hurry up, Gary groaned. I am losing my patience. Hold on, Patricia said. Why is it so thick? It is premium silicone, baby, Gary said. It is supposed to be thick. Just use a lot of it. Do not be shy. Okay, here we go, Patricia said. I heard the sound of the tube being squeezed, the wet sound of the thick gray paste hitting skin. Oh, wow, Gary said. That feels different. It is warm. It is warming lube genius. Patricia laughed. It is supposed to heat up. Yeah, but it is getting really hot, Gary said. Like, really hot. Just relax, Patricia said. Come here. I heard the shifting of weight on the cheap mattress. The rhythmic creaking of the springs began. Oh God, Gary groaned. That is tight. It is the friction, Patricia said breathlessly. It feels good. Yeah, Gary grunted. Yeah, it feels... Wait. The bed springs stopped squeaking. Patty, it is burning, Gary said, his voice losing its edge of pleasure. It is burning a lot. Mine too, Patricia said, her voice rising in pitch. It feels like... Oh God, it stings. Okay, stop, Gary said. I need to pull out. This is too much. There was a pause, a moment of silence that stretched for a heartbeat. Then came the sound that I will remember for the rest of my life. Gary grunted, a sound of exertion. Then Patricia let out a sharp gasp. Gary, what are you doing? She cried out. I cannot pull out, Gary's voice was rising into panic. It is stuck. What do you mean stuck? Patricia asked. Just pull harder. I am pulling, Gary yelled. It is not moving. It is like we are glued together. I took the headphones off. I did not need them anymore. Through the thin drywall, I heard a scream. It was not a scream of passion. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It burns, Patricia shrieked. Get off me! Get off me! I cannot, Gary roared. I am trying. It is ripping my skin. The marine epoxy had set. The chemical reaction was peaking, generating heat as it cured. The flesh of my wife and her lover was now fusing together, bonded by a layer of industrial adhesive that was designed to hold battleships together. I stood up and walked over to the small table in the corner of the room. I picked up the thermos of coffee I had brought from home. I poured myself a cup. I added a packet of sugar and stirred it slowly. From next door, the sounds of chaos were escalating. Something crashed to the floor, probably a lamp. They were thrashing around like wild animals caught in a snare. Help us, Gary was screaming. Somebody help us. I took a sip of coffee. It was still hot. It tasted good. I walked over to the window and peeked through the curtain again. I could see the curtains in room 104 shaking as they struggled. I checked my watch. The epoxy takes 5 minutes to set initially, but it takes 24 hours to cure completely. Right now, it was in the gel phase, sticky hot and absolutely unforgiving. Every movement they made, every attempt to pull apart was only tearing their own skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher asked. Yes, Mom, I said, making my voice sound shaky and frightened. I am at the Magnolia Motel, room 104. I think there is a domestic dispute. It sounds bad. I hear screaming. Someone keeps yelling about burning. I think someone might be dying in there. We are sending officers and an ambulance right now, sir, the dispatcher said. Stay in your room and lock the door. I will, Mom, I said. Please hurry. It sounds awful. I hung up the phone and sat back down. I took another sip of coffee. The screaming next door had turned into sobbing, low guttural moans of agony. I sat there in the dark, listening to the music of my revenge. They wanted to be together. They wanted to take everything from me and run away together. Well, now they were together, closer than they ever imagined. I waited for the sirens. They were coming, and when they arrived, the whole world was going to see exactly what kind of people Patricia and Gary really were. The show was about to move from the bedroom to the street, and I had a front row ticket. I sat in the dark stillness of room 105, adjusting the volume on the acoustic amplifier. The heavy industrial headphones pressed against my ears, creating a seal that shut out the hum of the air conditioner and the distant traffic on the highway, leaving only the intimate, terrifying sounds from the other side of the drywall. It was a strange sensation, being a ghostly observer to the destruction of my own marriage, but I felt no urge to look away. I had built this house of cards, and now I was going to watch it fall. Through the wall, I heard the distinct click of the plastic cap being flipped open. It was a small sound, but in the silence of my room, it sounded like the safety being clicked off a weapon. Then came the wet sound of the tube being squeezed. I knew exactly how much force it took to get that marine epoxy out. It was thick, viscous stuff, not like the slick silicone they were expecting. Do not be stingy with it, Gary muttered, his voice thick with anticipation. I am not, Patricia giggled. God, it is sticky. It is premium baby, Gary said. It is supposed to be tacky until it warms up. Put it everywhere. I heard the sounds of movement, the rustle of sheets, the rhythmic creaking of the cheap motel mattress. They were eager. They were rushing toward their own disaster with the enthusiasm of children running toward a cliff. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes, visualizing the chemistry taking place next door. Marine epoxy is a two-part adhesive, but the version I had chosen was a premixed formula that activated upon contact with moisture and body heat. It was an exothermic reaction. That means it generates heat as it cures. A lot of heat. About 30 seconds passed. The bed springs were squeaking in a steady rhythm. The sounds of their breathing were heavy and fast. Then the rhythm faltered. Wow! Gary said, his voice sounding confused. That is really heating up. I told you it was warming lube, Patricia replied, her breath hitching. But, yeah, it is getting very warm. It feels like... Gary paused. It feels like it is tightening. Is it supposed to do that? I do not know, Patricia said, her voice losing its playful edge. It stings a little. Gary stopped for a second. It is too hot. I cannot stop, Gary grunted. It is gripping me. Get off, Patricia said sharply. Seriously, Gary, get off. It burns. I am trying, Gary said, and I heard the sound of a struggle, the sheets thrashing. I cannot. It is not sliding. It is stuck. What do you mean, stuck? Patricia demanded, panic creeping into her tone. Just pull out. I am pulling, Gary yelled. It will not move. It is like... God, it hurts. It feels like my skin is ripping. The chemical reaction was hitting its peak now. The epoxy was curing, transforming from a paste into a hard resin, and in the process, it was releasing enough heat to cause first-degree burns. It was fusing them together, bonding skin to skin, with a strength that could withstand ocean currents. Ow, ow, ow! Patricia started to scream. Get it out! Get it out! It is burning me! I cannot! Gary roared. I am stuck. It is glued. It is glued tight. The sounds of passion had completely vanished, replaced by the raw guttural sounds of animal panic. I heard a lamp crash to the floor. I heard the headboard bang violently against the wall as they thrashed, trying to separate themselves. But physics was against them. The more they pulled, the more the epoxy dug into their raw flesh. "Oh my God," Gary sobbed. "What is this? What is happening?" "It is the lube!" Patricia shrieked. "You bought cheap lube! It is poison! I did not buy it! You brought it!" Gary yelled back. "You crazy witch! What did you put inside me?" I took the headphones off and set them gently on the table. I did not need the amplifier anymore. Their screams were audible through the wall with the naked eye. It sounded like a slaughterhouse next door. "Help us!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking. "Somebody help us!" "We are burning." I stood up and stretched my back. My old joints popped. I walked over to the small table where I had set up my coffee station. I unscrewed the lid of my thermos and poured a fresh cup of black coffee. Steam rising in the dim light. I took a slow, deliberate sip. It was good coffee, strong and bitter, just the way I liked it. I checked my watch. The initial set time for the epoxy was 5 minutes. They were at minute 3. So that meant the bond was already rubbery and tough. In 2 more minutes, it would be hard as stone. Every second they wasted fighting each other was just letting the bond cure stronger. I walked to the window and peered through the crack in the curtains. I could see the light shaking in room 104. Shadows danced frantically against their curtains. It looked like a fight for survival, and in a way it was. They were fighting to survive the consequences of their own actions. "Please, God," Gary screamed, and it was a sound of pure agony. "My skin. Oh God, my skin." I waited. I wanted to make sure they were truly inseparable. I wanted to make sure that no amount of pulling or washing would free them. I needed them to be a single unit when the paramedics arrived. I needed the humiliation to be absolute. The screaming reached a fever pitch. It was a duet of pain. They were no longer blaming each other. They were just begging for it to stop. I finished my coffee and set the cup down. It was time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I flipped it open and the screen glowed blue in the darkness. I dialed 911. "Emergency services." "What is your emergency?" the dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. I let a tremor enter my voice. I channeled the confused, frightened old man Patricia thought I was. "Yes, Mom," I said, my voice shaking. I am at the Magnolia Motel, on the North Highway. Room 104. "What is happening, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "I do not know, Mom," I said, breathless. "I am in the room next door. There is terrible screaming. A man and a woman. It sounds like they are being tortured. They keep yelling about burning. They keep yelling for help. I think someone might be killing them." "Are you safe, sir?" the dispatcher asked, her voice tightening. "I am locked in my room, Mom," I said. "But please hurry. It sounds like a bloodbath. I have never heard screaming like this." "We have units en route, sir," the dispatcher said. "Police and EMS are dispatched. Stay inside and do not open your door until officers arrive." "Okay," I said. "Okay. Please tell them to hurry." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Next door, the screaming had turned into low, jagged sobs. They were exhausted. The pain had likely sent them into shock. They were lying there fused together in a pool of their own sweat and regret, waiting for a savior. But no savior was coming. Only an audience. I sat back down in the chair by the window and waited for the flashing lights. The siren song of justice was about to begin, and I had the best seat in the house. They wanted to be together forever. Well, I had just granted their wish. Till death or surgery do us part. 10 minutes later, the world outside the Magnolia Motel turned into a kaleidoscope of red and blue light. The wail of sirens cut through the humid Texas air, drowning out the distant hum of the highway and the crickets in the scrub brush. It started with a single patrol car tires screeching on the gravel, tearing into the parking lot like a predator. Then came another, and then the heavy rumbling box of the ambulance. I watched from the shadows of my room for a moment longer, checking my appearance in the mirror. I messed up my hair just a bit to look like I had been napping. I hunched my shoulders. I practiced the bewildered look of a man roused from his sleep by chaos. Satisfied with the mask, I unlocked my door and stepped out onto the concrete walkway. The scene in the parking lot was already drawing a crowd. The doors of the other units had opened, and people were spilling out like insects from a kicked log. There were truck drivers in undershirts, a young couple who looked like they should be in school, and the night clerk who was frantically waving at the police officers. I shuffled toward this railing, blending in with the onlookers. I kept my head down just enough to be unobtrusive, but my eyes were locked on room 104. Two police officers, young and wired with adrenaline, were banging on the door. "Police, open up," one of them shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "We have reports of a disturbance. Open the door now." From inside there was no coherent answer, only a high-pitched, keening sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was the sound of an animal caught in a trap, a sound of pure, unadulterated suffering. "Kick it," the second officer yelled. The first officer stepped back and drove his boot into the door just below the handle. The cheap wood frame splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung inward, banging against the wall. Both officers rushed in, guns drawn, ready for a murderer or a maniac with a knife. "Freeze, let me see your hands," one of them shouted. Then there was a sudden silence. It was not a silence of peace, but of confusion. The officers stopped dead in their tracks. I saw the lead officer lower his weapon slightly, his posture shifting from aggression to bewilderment. "Jesus Christ," I heard him say clearly through the open door. "What the hell is this?" I moved closer along the walkway, leaning over the railing with the rest of the gawkers. From my angle, I could see into the room. It was a tableau of absolute humiliation. Patricia and Gary were tangled in the sheets, but there was no hiding their position. They were locked together in the most intimate way possible, but their bodies were contorted in agony. Gary was arched backward, his face a mask of sweat and tears, his mouth open in a silent scream. Patricia was clutching his shoulders, her nails digging into his skin, her face buried in his neck, not in passion, but in a desperate attempt to hide. They looked like a two-headed beast writhing in pain. The officers holstered their weapons, but they did not step closer. They looked at each other, unsure of how to proceed. This was not a domestic assault in the traditional sense. There was no attacker and no victim, just two people fused into a singular entity of regret. "We need a medic in here now," the officer shouted into his radio. "And tell them to hurry. We have a situation." The paramedics rushed in, pushing past the police with their heavy bags and a collapsible stretcher. There were two of them, a burly man with a beard and a younger woman who looked like she had seen everything. But she had clearly never seen this. She approached the bed, snapping on blue latex gloves. "Sir, Mom, can you tell me where you are hurt?" she asked, her voice professional and calm, cutting through the panic. "Down there," Gary gasped, pointing a shaking hand toward their joined bodies. "It burns! It is stuck! We are stuck!" The male paramedic leaned in closer, shining a penlight onto the area where they were connected. He squinted, then recoiled slightly. "What is that substance?" he asked. "It looks like gray cement." "It was the lube," Patricia sobbed, her voice muffled against Gary's skin. "It was supposed to be lube." The paramedic touched the edge of the bond with a gloved finger. He tapped it. It made a dull, hard sound. "This is not lubricant," he said, looking up at his partner. "This is an adhesive, a high-strength industrial adhesive. It is fully cured. It is hard as rock. He looked at Gary and Patricia with a mixture of pity and disbelief. You are chemically bonded, he said flatly. The heat you felt was the exothermic reaction. You have first and probably second-degree chemical burns around the contact site. Get us apart, Gary screamed, thrashing his legs. Cut it, just cut it. Sir. Please stop moving, the medic said, placing a firm hand on Gary's chest. If you move, you are going to tear the skin. The adhesive is stronger than your tissue. If you pull, you will rip yourselves open. I stood by the railing watching the color drain from Gary's face. He realized it then. He realized that there was no quick fix. He realized that the nightmare was just beginning. The paramedics tried to figure out a solution. They produced a bottle of saline and tried to irrigate the area, hoping to dissolve the bond or at least cool the burns. But marine epoxy is waterproof. The water just beat it up and rolled off the gray resin. It is not working, the female medic said. We cannot dissolve this here. We do not have the solvents, and even if we did, using them on open wounds would send them into shock. We have to separate them here, the police officer said, looking uncomfortable. You cannot take them like this. We do not have a choice, the male medic said, standing up and wiping sweat from his forehead. We cannot perform surgery in a motel room. They need a sterile environment. They need anesthesia. If we try to cut this here, we could sever an artery. He turned to his partner. We have to transport. Transport, Gary choked out. Like this together. Yes, sir, the medic said. There is no other way. The reality of the situation rippled through the room and out into the parking lot. The crowd had grown. People were whispering, pointing. Phones were already out, screens glowing in the twilight, recording the spectacle. Bring the gurney in, the medic ordered. Now came the logistics of moving two people who were essentially one object but with 4 arms and 4 legs. It was a physics problem that stripped away every last shred of their dignity. You have to move together, the medic instructed. On the count of 3, I need you to scoot to the edge of the bed. Do not pull apart. Move as a unit. 1, 2, 3. They shuffled awkwardly. Patricia whimpered with every inch. Gary gritted his teeth, veins bulging in his neck. They looked like a grotesque crab scuttling sideways. They managed to get to the edge of the bed. The stretcher was lowered to its lowest setting. Okay, now we have to lift you, the medic said. This is going to hurt. He signaled to the police officers. I need 2 hands. Grab the legs. We will take the torso. 4 men surrounded the couple. It was an image that belonged in a medieval dungeon, not a modern motel. Lift. They hoisted them up. Gary screamed a sound that tore through the air like a siren. Patricia just wept openly. They were deposited onto the narrow stretcher. It was not built for 2 people side by side. They had to lie on their sides, facing each other, hugging in a perverse embrace just to fit. The medics quickly strapped them down. They threw a white sheet over them, but there was no hiding what was underneath. The shape was unmistakable. 2 heads, 2 humps of shoulders, and a tangled mess of limbs beneath the fabric. They began to wheel them out. I stepped back into the shadows of a pillar, making sure I was invisible, but keeping my line of sight clear. As the gurney rattled over the threshold and onto the concrete walkway, the crowd erupted. It was a mix of gasps, laughter, and shock. "Oh my God, look at that!" someone shouted. "Are they stuck together?" a woman asked, horrified. "That is what you get for cheating." A trucker laughed loudly, lighting a cigarette. The paramedics moved quickly, trying to shield their patients from the onslaught, but it was impossible. The parking lot was a theater, and Patricia and Gary were the stars. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an old model, battered and scratched, but the camera worked perfectly fine. I held it up, steadying my hand against the pillar. I zoomed in. I caught the logo of the ambulance. I caught the frantic motion of the paramedics. And then I caught the faces. The wind caught the edge of the sheet, lifting it just for a second. I saw Patricia's face. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks in black streaks. Her eyes were wide, wild with panic, darting around the crowd. She looked at the people filming her, and I saw the realization hit her. Her life as the respectable society wife was over. This was going to be on the internet in an hour. Her friends at the charity league, her neighbors, the pastor at her church, everyone was going to see this. Then I saw Gary. He looked broken. He was squeezing his eyes shut, trying to wish himself out of existence. He knew what this meant. His investors, the people he owed money to, they would see this too. He was not just humiliated, he was a sitting duck. I pressed the record button. I captured the moment they were loaded into the back of the ambulance. The awkward maneuvering as the medics tried to slide the heavy stretcher into the bay without jarring them. The way Gary's foot twitched in agony. The way Patricia tried to pull the sheet back over her face, only to find she could not move her arm without pulling Gary with her. It was tragic. It was grotesque. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing them in their mobile prison. The siren wailed again, a mournful sound that signaled their departure. The police officers lingered for a moment, dispersing the crowd. "Nothing to see here, folks. Go back to your rooms," the officer said, though he sounded like he did not believe it himself. Everyone had seen everything. I stopped recording and saved the video. I checked the quality. It was grainy but clear enough. I had the faces. I had the context. I had the proof. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The ambulance pulled out of the parking lot. Lights flashing, disappearing down the dark highway toward the county hospital. I stood there for a long time watching the red lights fade. The crowd began to break up the excitement, over leaving only the buzz of conversation. I walked back to my room and unlocked the door. I went inside and gathered my things, my thermos, the acoustic listening device, the binoculars. I packed them neatly into my bag. I did not need to stay at the Magnolia Motel anymore. My work here was done. I walked out to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. The night air was still hot, but I felt a cool breeze of satisfaction. I climbed into the cab of the Ford and started the engine. It rumbled to life, a solid, reliable sound. I backed out of the space and drove toward the exit. As I passed room 104, I saw the door hanging open on its broken hinges. The light was still on inside, illuminating the messy bed and the chaos of the room. It looked like a bomb had gone off in there. In a way, one had. A bomb made of lies and epoxy. I turned onto the highway heading south toward the city. I was going to the hospital. Not as a husband rushing to his wife's side, but as a witness. There was still one act left in this play. I needed to be there when the doctors gave them the news. I needed to be there when the police asked their questions. And most of all, I needed to be there to deliver the final blow. Because while the glue had done its job, the real trap, the financial trap, was just about to spring shut. I turned on the radio. A country song was playing, something about cheating hearts and broken roads. I hummed along, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. I had never felt more awake in my life. The automatic doors of the county hospital slid open, with a hiss of compressed air, welcoming me into the fluorescent purgatory of the emergency room waiting area. The air smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, a scent that always reminded me of bad news. I took a moment to adjust my posture before stepping fully into the light. I slumped my shoulders forward, rounding my back just enough to shave 2 inches off my height. I let my hands tremble slightly at my sides. I widened my eyes, mimicking the look of a man who is overwhelmed and terrified. It was time for the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled up to the triage desk where a heavy-set nurse with tired eyes was typing on a computer. She did not look up immediately. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my voice cracking with just the right amount of panic. "I am looking for my wife. Patricia Caldwell. The police called me." They said there was an accident. The nurse stopped typing. Her head snapped up. I saw the flash of recognition in her eyes. Everyone in the hospital knew about the couple who had been brought in fused together. It was the kind of story that traveled from the ambulance bay to the cafeteria in 5 minutes flat. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You are the husband." "Yes, Mom," I said, clutching the edge of the desk for support. "Is she okay? Is she hurt bad?" She looked at me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She is being evaluated right now, sir. Please have a seat. I will get the doctor." I did not sit. I paced back and forth in the small waiting area, wringing my hands, mumbling to myself. I made sure the security guard and the other patients saw me. I wanted them to see a worried husband, not a vindictive mastermind. About 10 minutes later, a man in a white coat approached me. He looked young, too young to be a surgeon, but he had the weary expression of someone who had seen too much. "Mr. Caldwell?" he asked. "Yes, doctor, that is me. Where is Patty? Is she all right?" "I am Dr. Evans," the young man said, gesturing for me to follow him into a small private consultation room off the main hallway. We stepped inside and he closed the door. The room was quiet, a relief from the chaos of the lobby. "Please sit down, Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Evans said, taking a seat opposite me. I sat on the edge of the chair, clutching my baseball cap in my hands. "Tell me the truth, doctor," I said. "Is she dying?" "No, she is not dying," Dr. Evans said, choosing his words carefully. "But the situation is extremely complex. Your wife and a man identified as Gary Miller were brought in suffering from severe chemical burns and adhesion." "Adhesion," I repeated, feigning ignorance. "You mean they are stuck?" The doctor cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. He picked up a clipboard and studied it, avoiding my eyes. "Yes. It appears that a high-strength industrial epoxy was introduced during intimate contact. The adhesive has fully cured. It has bonded their skin together in the pelvic region." I gasped a loud, ragged sound. I covered my mouth with a shaking hand. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Oh my God." The doctor continued, his voice clinical and detached. "The chemical reaction generated significant heat, causing second-degree burns. But the primary issue is the bond itself. We cannot dissolve it. The solvents required would be too toxic to use on open wounds." "So what do you do?" I asked, my eyes wide with horror. "We have to operate," he said gravely. "We have to surgically separate them, because the adhesive has bonded with the epidermis, and in some places the dermis. We will have to excise the affected skin." "Excise?" I asked. "You mean cut?" "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. We have to cut the skin away to separate them. It will be a lengthy procedure. They will require skin grafts afterwards. There will be significant scarring and the recovery will be painful. There is also a high risk of infection." I slumped back in the chair, letting out a long, low moan. I buried my face in my hands. Inside, I was marveling at the efficacy of the marine epoxy. It had done exactly what it promised on the tube, but on the outside, I was a broken man. While I was sitting there acting out my grief, the door opened again. A police officer stepped in. It was the same officer from the motel room, Officer Miller. He looked tired and skeptical. He held a clear plastic evidence bag in his gloved hand. Inside the bag was the black tube of Velvet Touch lubricant. "Mr. Caldwell," the officer said, his voice hard, "we need to ask you some questions." I looked up, wiping fake tears from my eyes. "Officer, is it true? Are they going to cut them apart?" "We are investigating how this happened," the officer said, ignoring my question. "We recovered this tube from the scene." The lab took a quick look. "It is not lubricant inside, Mr. Caldwell. It is marine-grade construction epoxy." He placed the bag on the table between us. Do you know anything about this? He asked, his eyes boring into mine. I stared at the tube. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I blinked rapidly, as if my brain was struggling to process the information. Marine epoxy, I stammered. Like, for boats. Yes, sir. The kind used in heavy construction. I reached out a trembling hand toward the bag, but did not touch it. That looks like the tube I saw in her bag, I said, my voice trailing off. Officer Miller leaned forward. Mr. Caldwell, this requires premeditation. Someone replaced the contents of this tube. You are a contractor, right? You would have access to this kind of material. This was the moment. The pivot point. If I faltered now, I would be in handcuffs. I needed to sell the narrative Patricia herself had built. I looked from the officer to the doctor, and then I let out a sob. I grabbed my head with both hands, rocking back and forth. Oh no, I wailed. Oh sweet Jesus, no. It is my fault. It is all my fault. The officer frowned. What is your fault, Mr. Caldwell? I was fixing the sink. I cried out, the words tumbling over each other. Yesterday, the sink in the master bathroom. The pipe was cracked. I went to the garage to get the epoxy. I have tubes of it. I use it for everything. I took a deep breath, making my chest heave. I put the tube on the counter. I continued, my voice shaking so hard it was barely understandable. Right next to her things. My eyes. Officer. My eyes are not what they used to be. I have cataracts. I am supposed to get surgery next month. I looked up at them, pleading for understanding. I thought it was her hand cream, I said. Or that jelly she uses for her dry skin. She is always complaining about dry skin. I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was putting her things away. I must have... Oh God. I must have put the glue in her bag by mistake. Officer Miller looked skeptical. You confused industrial glue with lubricant. It comes in a black tube, I said, pointing at the evidence bag. The epoxy I buy. It comes in a black tube, too. And without my glasses, I am just a confused old man, officer. I mix things up. Patricia tells me all the time. She says, Harry, you are losing your marbles. She says I put the milk in the cupboard and the cereal in the fridge. I buried my face in my hands again, sobbing louder. I did this, and I moaned. I did this to my poor Patty. She was just going to her seminar, and I ruined everything. The room was silent for a long moment. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Then I heard the rustle of papers. Officer Miller was looking at his notepad. You said she tells you that you are losing your marbles, he asked, his tone softening slightly. Yes, I said, sniffing. She has me on supplements. She made me sign papers last week. Because she says I cannot handle my own affairs anymore. She says I am a danger to myself. I guess she was right. The officer looked at the doctor. The doctor nodded slowly. We have her medical history on file here, the doctor said quietly. She was listed as his primary caregiver on the admission forms. There are notes here from a previous visit where she mentioned concerns about early-onset dementia and cognitive decline in her husband. Officer Miller let out a long sigh. The tension in his shoulders dropped. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something else. Pity. And a little bit of disgust for the situation, but not for me. So you are telling me this was an accident, the officer said, but it sounded more like a conclusion than a question. You mixed up the tubes because of your eyesight and your condition. I would never hurt Patty, I said, my voice trembling with conviction. I love her. I built that house for her. Why would I do this? I looked at the officer with the wide, watery eyes of a man whose world has collapsed. Please, officer, I begged. Do not take me to jail. Who will take care of her when she gets out? She needs me. Officer Miller looked at the doctor again. The doctor shrugged. It holds up, the doctor said. If he has a history of cognitive issues and poor vision, accidents happen, especially with household chemicals. We see it all the time. People drinking bleach thinking it is water. This is extreme, but plausible. The officer picked up the evidence bag. All right, Mr. Caldwell, he said. We will have to file a report. But considering the circumstances and the medical history, it looks like a tragic accident. He stood up. You should know, sir, he added, his voice dropping lower. Your wife, she was not at a seminar. She was at a motel with another man. I stared at him, letting the shock wash over my face. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I let the realization sink in slowly, painfully. Another man, I whispered. Patty. Cheating. I slumped forward, looking defeated and small. So I glued my wife to her lover, I said, my voice hollow. It appears so, the officer said. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort. Go home, Mr. Caldwell, he said. Get some rest. There is nothing you can do here. The surgery will take hours. We will call you when she is out of recovery. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the table, as if my legs could barely support me. Thank you, officer, I said. Thank you. I walked out of the consultation room, shuffling my feet. I walked past the nurse's station, past the security guard, past the other patients. I kept my head down, hiding the dry eyes behind my hand. As I stepped through the automatic doors into the humid night air, I let out a breath I had been holding for 20 minutes. They bought it. They bought it hook, line, and sinker. And why wouldn't they? Patricia had spent months painting me as a senile, incompetent old fool. She had laid the groundwork for her own defense perfectly. She had convinced the world I was losing my mind. And now that lie was my shield. She wanted to use my alleged dementia to steal my money. Instead, I used it to glue her to her boyfriend and walk away scot-free. I walked to my truck, my step becoming lighter with every yard. I climbed into the cab and started the engine. I checked my watch. The surgery was just beginning. They were about to start cutting. The pain for them was just starting. But for me, the night was still young, and I had one more stop to make before I went home. I had a phone call to make, a call to my son Brian. It was time to open the financial files. It was time to see exactly what Patricia had been planning to sell and who she had been planning to sell it to. I pulled out of the hospital parking lot, leaving my wife in the hands of the surgeons. I felt a strange sense of peace. The physical trap had sprung. Now it was time to spring the legal one. I drove into the night, the city lights blurring past me. The game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The hospital cafeteria was quiet at 2 a.m, the only sound coming from the hum of the vending machines and the distant buffer polishing the hallway floors. I sat at a small round table with a fresh cup of terrible coffee, watching the clock on the wall. Upstairs in the operating theater, surgeons were currently engaged in the delicate and gruesome task of separating my wife from her lover. I imagined the scalpels, the retractors, the smell of cauterized flesh. It was a brutal procedure, but necessary. They were cutting away the physical bond, but I was down here preparing to sever the financial one. My phone buzzed. I looked up to see my son Brian walking through the double doors. Brian is 40 years old and a shark in a 3-piece suit. He is a corporate litigator, the kind of lawyer who eats other lawyers for breakfast. He inherited my work ethic, but his mother's sharp tongue. He is my son from my first marriage, and he never really liked Patricia. He was polite to her for my sake, but he always told me she had the eyes of a predator. Tonight, he was going to be proven right. Dad, Brian said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert. I got your message. Is it true? Is she really stuck? I took a sip of coffee. It is true, son. Industrial marine epoxy. A terrible accident. Brian looked at me. He knows me better than anyone. He saw the glint in my eye. He saw the lack of genuine distress. A slow smile spread across his face. An accident, he repeated dryly. Just like the time you accidentally built a fence 2 feet onto that nasty neighbor's property line and forced him to pay for a survey. I shrugged. I am an old man, Brian. My eyesight is failing. I confused tubes. Brian chuckled, shaking his head. You are a dangerous man, Harry Caldwell. So what is the play? Why did you call me down here at this hour with my laptop? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Because while they are cutting them apart upstairs, we are going to dissect them down here. Patricia has been plotting Brian. She has a power of attorney she tricked me into signing. She was planning to commit me to a nursing home and sell off everything. The house, the rental units, the commercial land, all of it. Brian's face hardened instantly. The amusement vanished, replaced by the cold fury of a son protecting his father. She did what? She is working with that guy, Gary Miller, I continued. The one they are surgically removing from her right now. They were going to liquidate my assets and run to Mexico. But I need to know why. I need to know the details. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. Last week, Patricia fell asleep on the couch with her phone unlocked. I managed to get into her settings and write down her cloud password. She backs up everything, Brian. Every text, every email, every photo. It is all in the cloud. Brian opened his leather briefcase and pulled out his sleek laptop. He booted it up, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Give it to me, he said. I read him the password. He typed it in and hit enter. A moment later, the screen filled with folders and icons. It was a digital map of my wife's secret life. Brian navigated through the folders with the precision of a surgeon. He found the Messages app first. He scrolled back a few months. Here we go, he muttered. Texts between Patty and Gary. Jesus, Dad. It is explicit. Skip the smut, I said. Look for the money. Search for terms like sell, land, bank, or debt. Brian typed into the search bar. The results populated instantly. He clicked on an email thread that Gary had forwarded to Patricia. Oh, this is interesting, Brian said, leaning closer to the screen. This is from a Gmail account. Sender is just a string of numbers. Subject line is final notice. Read it, I said. Brian read aloud. Mr. Miller, your extension has expired. Our partners are losing patience. The principal plus interest now stands at $2 million. If payment is not received by the first of the month, we will be forced to collect in alternative ways. We know where your office is. We know where you live. Do not make us come to you. $2 million, I whistled low. Gary is in deep. It gets better, Brian said, clicking another tab. Here is an email Gary sent to Patricia 3 days ago. He says, baby, do not worry about the timeline. I have the buyer for the land locked in. As soon as the old man is out of the picture, we close. I will take my cut for the business investment, and we will be living like kings. Business investment, I scoffed. He is paying off a gambling debt to the mob. He is not investing a dime. Brian kept digging. He found a synced folder that contained Gary's personal notes. It seemed Gary was careless enough to log into his personal accounts on Patricia's iPad, which then backed up to this cloud account. It was a treasure trove of stupidity. Dad, look at this. Brian turned the laptop toward me. It was a chat log between Gary and someone named Rocco. Gary, almost there. The mark is clueless. His wife is doing all the heavy lifting. Rocco, you better be sure, Gary. You are on thin ice. Gary, I am sure. The old hag is eating out of my hand. She thinks I am in love with her. It is pathetic, really. She is 58 trying to pass for 30. I just have to hold my nose and play the part for 1 more week. Once the land sells, I am ghosting her. I will wire you the cash and meet you in Cabo. She will never see me again. I read the words on the screen. The old hag. Hold my nose. Ghosting her. It was brutal. It was the kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any knife. Patricia had sold her soul for this man. She was willing to destroy me, willing to lock me away and steal my life's work, all for a man who called her a pathetic old hag behind her back. She does not know, does she? Brian asked quietly, reading my expression. No, I said. She thinks they are running away together. She thinks this is a great romance. She has no idea he is just using her to pay off a hitman. Brian sat back, running a hand through his hair. Dad, this is enough to put them away for conspiracy to commit fraud, maybe even elder abuse if we push the nursing home angle. We can freeze her assets immediately. We can file a restraining order. We can have them arrested before the anesthesia wears off. I looked at the screen at the evidence of their cruelty. I thought about the power I held in my hands. I could call the police right now. I could hand this laptop over to Officer Miller and let the justice system grind them down. But that felt too impersonal. That felt too easy. Patricia needed to know. She needed to know that her great love was a lie. She needed to know that while she was plotting against me, she was being played for a fool. The physical pain of the surgery was one thing, but the emotional devastation of the truth that would be the real punishment. Not yet, Brian, I said. What do you mean, not yet? Brian asked. We have them dead to rights. I want to see her face, I said. I want to be there when she finds out. I want to be the one to tell her. Brian looked at me for a long moment. He saw the resolve in my face. He closed the laptop. You want to drop the bomb yourself? I do, I said. They are in recovery soon. They will be waking up in a world of pain. I want to add a little more weight to that burden. Brian nodded slowly. Okay, Dad. I will draft the legal paperwork. I will have the divorce papers and the asset freeze ready to serve. But you take the lead. We sat there in the cafeteria for another hour, finalizing the plan. Brian typed up the documents using the hospital Wi-Fi. I watched him working, feeling a surge of pride. He was a good son. He was loyal. He was everything Gary and Patricia were not. Around 4 a.m, a nurse came to find me. Mr. Caldwell, she said. They are out of surgery. They are in the recovery room. You can see your wife now. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. I looked at Brian. It is showtime, I said. Brian picked up his briefcase. After you, Dad. We walked toward the elevators. My step was heavy, but my heart was light. I was about to deliver the punchline to the cruelest joke Patricia had ever told. And I was going to make sure she understood every single word. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open. I stepped out into the quiet hallway of the post-anesthesia care unit. I could hear the beeping of monitors. I could smell the sharp tang of disinfectant. I walked toward room 302. I stopped at the door and took a deep breath. I adjusted my expression one last time. No more confused old man. No more victim. I opened the door and walked in, ready to end this marriage exactly how it should have ended years ago, with the cold, hard truth. The recovery room was bathed in the harsh white light of early morning. It smelled of antiseptic and that distinct metallic tang of blood that hangs in the air after surgery. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors and the low hum of the ventilation system. I walked in quietly, my shoes clicking softly on the linoleum floor. There were 2 beds pushed relatively close together, separated by a small nightstand. It was a cruel arrangement, likely done for the convenience of the nursing staff, but it served my purposes perfectly. Patricia occupied the bed on the left. Gary was on the right. They were both awake but groggy. The anesthesia was wearing off, leaving behind the raw, jagged edge of post-operative pain. They looked like casualties of war. Patricia was pale, her face devoid of makeup, looking every bit her 58 years. She was covered in a thin hospital blanket, but I could see the bulk of heavy bandages around her midsection and thighs. Gary looked worse. His skin was gray and clammy beads of sweat standing out on his forehead. He was staring at the ceiling, his eyes glazed with painkillers and fear. I stood at the foot of the beds for a moment, just watching them. I adjusted my cuffs. I was not wearing my old work shirt and stained jeans anymore. I was wearing my charcoal gray Sunday suit, the one I wore to weddings and funerals. I had shaved. I stood tall, my back straight, my shoulders squared. The confused, shuffling old man was gone. Patricia turned her head slowly on the pillow. Her eyes found me. At first there was confusion, then a flicker of hope. She probably thought I was there to comfort her, to be the doting husband she could manipulate once again. "Harry." She croaked, her voice raspy from the breathing tube. "Oh, Harry, it hurts so much." I did not move to hold her hand. I did not rush to her side. I just stood there, calm and immovable like a statue. "I bet it does." "Patty," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Surgery is a painful thing, especially when they have to peel you off another human being." Gary turned his head at the sound of my voice. He blinked, trying to focus. "Mr. Caldwell," he mumbled. I can explain." "Save your breath, Gary," I said, cutting him off. "You are going to need it for the screaming later." Patricia frowned, trying to process the change in my demeanor. She tried to sit up, but winced and collapsed back onto the pillows, letting out a sharp cry of pain. "Harry, why are you acting like this?" she whined. "It was an accident. A terrible accident. You have to help us. You have to tell the doctors to give me more medicine." I walked around to the side of the bed, standing between them. I looked down at my wife. I looked at the woman I had trusted with my life, the woman who had planned to lock me away and sell everything I owned. "There are no accidents, Patty," I said coldly. "Just like there was no seminar in Houston. Just like there is no dementia." Her eyes widened. The realization began to dawn on her. The fog of drugs was lifting, replaced by the cold clarity of fear. "What? What are you talking about?" she whispered. "I know everything I said. I know about the power of attorney. I know about Shady Acres nursing home. I know about the land sale. And I know about the marine epoxy." I paused, letting that sink in. "I put it there, Patty. I swapped the tubes." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You," she gasped. "You did this. You monster." "I am the monster," I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I am not the one who was going to throw my spouse into a state facility so I could run off to Mexico with a gambling addict." Gary made a noise in his throat, a strangled sound of protest. "Now hold on," he said, his voice weak. "You cannot prove any of that." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I can prove all of it," I said. "And so can you, Gary. You were very chatty yesterday. You really should be more careful about thin walls." I tapped the screen and found the audio file. I turned the volume all the way up. I hit play. The sound of Gary's voice filled the quiet hospital room, tinny but unmistakable. "The old hag is eating out of my hand. She thinks I am in love with her. It is pathetic, really. She is 58 trying to pass for 30. I just have to hold my nose and play the part for one more week." I watched Patricia's face. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. First came the confusion, then the shock, and finally the devastating impact of the truth. She stopped breathing. She turned her head slowly, painfully, to look at Gary. Gary was trying to shrink into his mattress. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Once the land sells, I am ghosting her," the recording continued. "I will wire you the cash and meet you in Cabo. She will never see me again." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Patricia was staring at Gary. Her eyes were not filled with love anymore. They were filled with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. Her face turned a mottled red, her lips trembling with rage. "You said you loved me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You said we were soulmates." Gary tried to stammer a defense. "Baby, do not listen to him. It is a fake. He edited it." "Hold your nose!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking. "You have to hold your nose to be with me." She tried to lunge at him, but the bandages held her back. She thrashed against the bed rails, ignoring the pain tearing at her stitches. "I gave you everything," she shrieked. "I signed over the house. I was going to put my husband in a home for you, and you call me an old hag." Gary flinched as if she had slapped him. "Look, Patty, you have to understand," he said, desperate now. "I was in a bind. I owe people money, bad people. I had to say whatever I had to say." "So you used me," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the sweat. "You were just using me for the money. You never loved me." "Love you," Gary laughed, a harsh, bitter sound, born of pain and narcotics. "Look at you. You are a desperate old woman. You threw yourself at me. I did what I had to do to survive." "You bastard!" Patricia screamed. "You lying filth!" She grabbed the plastic pitcher of water from her bedside table and hurled it at him. It missed, splashing water all over his bandages. Gary yelled in pain as the cold water hit his sensitive skin. "You crazy witch, stop it! You are the one who glued us together." "This is your fault. It is your fault," Patricia yelled back. "If you hadn't been rushing me, if you hadn't been so greedy, none of this would have happened." I stood there in the middle of the crossfire, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. It was better than I had imagined. They were tearing each other apart. The bond of their affair, which had seemed so strong, so destructive to my life, was nothing but smoke and lies. And now that the truth was out, they were devouring each other like starving wolves. I walked over to the side counter, where a nurse had left a tray of juice cups for the patients. I picked up a small plastic cup of orange juice. I peeled back the foil lid. I took a sip. It was tart and cold. I watched them fight. Patricia was sobbing now, great heaving sobs of humiliation and heartbreak. Gary was cursing, trying to dry his bandages, pressing the call button for the nurse frantically. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "I hate to interrupt this reunion, but there is one more thing." They both stopped looking at me. They had almost forgotten I was there. "The money," I said simply. "What money?" Gary asked, his eyes narrowing. "The $2 million from the land sale," I said. "The money you promised your investors, Gary. The money you were going to pay off the mob." Gary went pale. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything, Gary," I said, taking another sip of juice. "And here is the bad news. That sale is not happening. I canceled the power of attorney this morning. The land is not for sale. The house is not for sale." Gary looked like he was going to be sick. Without that money, I am dead," he whispered. "They will kill me." I shrugged. "That sounds like a you problem, Gary. I actually did you a favor, though. I let your friends know where you are." "What?" Gary gasped. "I sent a little message to that number you were texting," I said casually. "I told them you were detained at the county hospital. Room 302. Visiting hours start at 9. I imagine they will want to come by and wish you a speedy recovery." Gary started to hyperventilate. The monitors attached to his chest began to beep rapidly, signaling his rising heart rate. "And you, Patty," I said, turning to my wife. Or should I say my ex-wife? She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Harry, please," she begged. "He tricked me. I was vulnerable. I did not mean to hurt you. I can fix this. We can fix this." "No, we cannot," I said. "Because I also found the prenup amendment you signed 5 years ago. The one where you agreed that any infidelity would void your claim to my premarital assets. I have the photos, Patty. I have the video from the motel parking lot. I have the medical report stating you were surgically separated from your lover. You are leaving this marriage with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Patricia fell back against the pillows, defeated. She knew the game was over. She had gambled everything on a man who despised her, and she had lost. I finished my orange juice and tossed the empty cup into the trash can. It made a satisfying thud. I am going to go now, I said, straightening my jacket. I have a meeting with my lawyer. Enjoy your recovery. I hear skin grafts are very itchy when they heal. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, the screaming started again. Patricia was cursing Gary. Gary was screaming for security, screaming that hitmen were coming for him. The monitors were alarming. Nurses were rushing down the hall. I stepped out into the corridor, and the heavy door swung shut behind me, muffling the chaos. I took a deep breath of the sterile hospital air. It tasted like victory. I walked down the hall, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me. My son Brian was waiting in the lobby. We had work to do, but the hard part, the dirty part, was done. I checked my watch. It was time for breakfast, and for the first time in 20 years, I was going to eat exactly what I wanted. I stood in the hallway for a moment, watching the nurses rush past me with trays of sedatives. They were trying to restore order to the chaos I had unleashed, but some fires cannot be put out with a simple injection. I saw my son Brian walking toward me from the elevator bank. He was carrying a thick manila envelope, and his expression was grim and determined. He looked like a man arriving to foreclose on a soul. "We are not done yet, Dad," Brian said, as he stopped in front of me. "I have the papers ready to serve. Do you want to do this now, or let them rest?" I looked back at the door of room 302. Resting was a luxury for the innocent. Patricia and Gary were far from innocent. They had planned to leave me destitute and rotting in a state facility. They did not deserve a moment of peace. Now I said, "Let us finish it." We pushed the door open and walked back inside. The room had quieted down, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Patricia was staring at the ceiling, tears leaking silently from the corners of her eyes. Gary was breathing shallowly, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. When they saw us return, a fresh wave of panic washed over their faces. "What do you want now?" Patricia rasped, her voice weak. "Haven't you done enough, Harry? Just leave us alone." Brian stepped forward. He did not look at her with the warmth of a stepson. He looked at her with the cold, clinical detachment of a prosecutor. "We are not here to chat, Patty," Brian said, placing the envelope on the tray table at the foot of her bed. "We are here to conduct business. Specifically, the business of your eviction from my father's life." He pulled out a document stapled in blue legal paper. "Do you recognize this?" he asked, holding it up. Patricia squinted at the paper. It is a contract. It is the post-nuptial agreement you signed 5 years ago," Brian said. "Do you remember? It was right around the time you started demanding to be put on the title for the rental properties. You said you wanted security. You said you wanted to feel like a true partner." "I remember," Patricia whispered. "What about it?" Brian flipped to the 3rd page. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "Dad was hesitant to sign over half his business assets," Brian explained. "But he agreed on one condition." "Do you remember the condition, Patty?" She stayed silent, her face paling. "It is called a fidelity clause." Brian continued, his voice sharp. "It states that any proven act of adultery or marital misconduct immediately voids the spouse's claim to all marital assets, alimony, and spousal support. It reverts all joint property back to the primary earner. In this case, my father." He dropped the document onto her chest. It landed with a light slap. "We have the video from the motel," Brian listed, counting off on his fingers. "We have the police report. We have the medical records documenting the surgical separation. And we have your own voice on tape admitting to the affair and the conspiracy to defraud. You violated the clause, Patty. You violated it in the most spectacular, public way possible. Patricia picked up the paper, her hands trembling so badly the pages rattled. But the house, she stammered. The cars. I have rights. Texas is a community property state. Not with a valid post-nup, you do not, Brian said, cutting her off. You signed away your rights when you signed into that motel room. You are leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it, which, if I recall correctly, was a suitcase of used clothes and a pile of credit card debt my father paid off. No, Patricia wailed, the sound rising in her throat. You cannot do this. I will be homeless. I have nowhere to go. You should have thought about that before you tried to put my dad in a nursing home, Brian said coldly. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises once you are discharged. I will have a team there to ensure you only take personal items. No jewelry bought by my father. No furniture. Just your clothes. Patricia slumped back against the pillows, sobbing into her hands. The reality of her future was crashing down on her. She was 58 years old, with no job, no assets, no husband, and a reputation that was currently being shredded on social media. She was ruined. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange absence of pity. I had loved her once. I had given her everything. And she had looked at me with contempt and planned my demise. She had earned every bit of this desolation. I turned my attention to the other bed. Gary was watching us, his eyes wide and terrified. He was trying to make himself small, trying to disappear into the hospital linens. And you, Mr. Miller, I said, stepping closer to his side of the room. We need to have a little talk about your future. I do not have any money, Gary blurted out. You can sue me, but I am broke. I have nothing. I know you are broke, Gary, I said, keeping my voice low and intimate. I know you gambled away the $50,000 I lent you. I know you gambled away your business, and I know you were banking on selling my land to save your skin. Gary flinched. Look, Mr. Caldwell, I am sorry. I really am. Just let me go. I will leave town. You will never see me again. Oh, I am sure you want to leave town, I said, leaning in close until my face was inches from his. Especially considering who you owe money to. Gary froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. What? What do you mean? He whispered. I did a little digging, Gary, I said. Or rather, my son did. We found your emails. We saw the threats. $2 million is a lot of money to owe the Los Gatos cartel. Gary started to shake. The bed frame rattled with his trembling. Please, he begged, his voice a high-pitched whine. Please do not tell anyone. If they find me. I put a finger to my lips, shushing him. I would never tell anyone, Gary, I said, mocking his tone. That would be irresponsible. Although, I did make a phone call on the way over here. Gary stopped breathing. His eyes bulged. You called them, he squeaked. I called a number I found in your text history, I said, shrugging. A guy named Rocco. He seemed very interested to know why his payments were late. I told him you were unfortunately detained. I told him you had a little accident. No. Gary moaned, tears leaking from his eyes. No. I told him you were here at County General. I continued, my voice hard as granite. Room 302. I told him you were bedridden and unable to go anywhere. I thought he might want to send flowers, or maybe a few of his associates to keep you company. Gary let out a strangled cry. He tried to sit up, forgetting about the fresh incisions that crisscrossed his groin and thighs. I have to go, he screamed. I have to get out of here. They are coming. He threw the covers off. His legs were wrapped in thick white bandages. There were drainage tubes snaking out from under the gauze. He swung his legs over the side of the bed. Sir, you cannot get up, a nurse shouted from the doorway, dropping her clipboard. I have to go, Gary yelled, his eyes wild. Help me up! He tried to stand. He put his weight on his legs. The moment his feet hit the floor, the stitches tore. The fresh wounds from the skin grafts stretched and ripped. A bloom of red blood instantly began to soak through the white bandages. Gary screamed. It was not a scream of fear this time. It was a scream of blinding physical agony. His legs buckled under him. He collapsed onto the cold linoleum floor, writhing in a pool of his own blood and urine. "My legs," he shrieked, clutching at the bandages. "My legs." The nurses rushed in, swarming over him, trying to stabilize him, trying to get him back into bed. The monitors were alarming. The room was a cacophony of panic and pain. I stood back watching the scene unfold. Gary was broken, physically, financially, and spiritually. He was trapped in a hospital bed waiting for the wolves to come and collect their debt. And he had nowhere to run. Patricia was screaming, too horrified by the blood, horrified by the reality of the man she had destroyed her life for. I looked at Brian. He was standing by the door, watching with a grim satisfaction. He nodded at me. It was done. The legal hammer had fallen, and the street justice was on its way. I adjusted my tie. I looked at the wreckage of my enemies one last time. "Goodbye, Patty," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Good luck with the single life. And Gary, try to stay in one piece. You have visitors coming." I turned my back on them and walked out of the room. I walked past the nurses' station where the staff was frantically calling for doctors. I walked down the long corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The weight of the lies, the weight of the betrayal, it was all gone. I was a free man. I was a wealthy man. And I was a man who had protected his own. I walked out into the early morning sun. It was a new day. And I had a lot of living left to do. 1 week later, the doctors finally released Patricia from the county hospital. I was not there to pick her up. I had blocked her number, her email, and every other avenue of communication she had used to manipulate me for the past decade. Instead, she had to call a rideshare service using a prepaid phone because I had canceled her credit cards and cut off her cell service the day after the surgery. I was not at the house when she arrived, but I watched the footage later on the security cameras I had installed years ago. It was a pathetic sight. The taxi dropped her off at the curb. She moved slowly, wincing with every step, her gait awkward and painful due to the extensive skin grafts on her inner thighs. She walked up the driveway of the house she thought she owned, the house she had planned to sell out from under me. She reached into her purse and pulled out her key. She slid it into the lock and turned it. Nothing happened. She tried again, jiggling the handle, pushing her hip against the wood. The door did not budge. I had changed the locks 3 hours after the ambulance took her away. She stepped back, confused. Then she saw the pile on the front porch. It was not her collection of designer suitcases. It was a set of 3 battered, mismatched bags she had brought into our marriage 20 years ago. Old vinyl suitcases with broken zippers and taped handles. Next to them were plastic garbage bags filled with her clothes. Not the furs or the couture gowns I had bought her, but the basic items. Jeans, t-shirts, the things that legally belonged to her and her alone. A security guard from a private firm I had hired stepped out from the side of the house. He was a large man with crossed arms and no sense of humor. He handed her a sealed envelope from Brian. Inside was the restraining order and the notice of eviction. I watched on the screen as she read the letter. Her shoulders slumped. She looked at the closed door, then at the garbage bags, then at the empty street. She sat down on one of her old suitcases and buried her face in her hands. She was exactly where she had started before she met me, alone, broke, and sitting on the curb with nothing but her own bad decisions for company. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and brutal. In Texas, divorce cases can drag on for years, especially when there are significant assets involved. But Brian had prepared a case so airtight, it was suffocating. We went before a judge 2 weeks later. Patricia arrived with a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he knew he had already lost. The hearing took less than an hour. Brian presented the evidence with the efficiency of an executioner. He played the audio recording from the motel. He showed the video of them being loaded into the ambulance. He presented the medical reports confirming the nature of the surgery. And finally, he presented the signed post-nuptial agreement with the fidelity clause highlighted in neon yellow. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, looked at Patricia over her glasses. "Mrs. Caldwell," the judge said, "the evidence of your infidelity is irrefutable. The evidence of your conspiracy to defraud your husband is overwhelming. You signed a contract stating that adultery would forfeit your claim to marital assets. Do you dispute your signature on this document?" Patricia whispered no. "Then I am ruling in favor of the petitioner," the judge declared, slamming her gavel. "The divorce is granted on grounds of cruelty and adultery. The premarital and marital assets revert to Mr. Caldwell. No alimony is awarded. You are responsible for your own legal fees and medical bills." It was a total lockout. Patricia left the courtroom shaking. She tried to approach me in the hallway, her eyes pleading. "Harry," she said, reaching out a hand. "Please. I am $40,000 in debt from the hospital. I have nowhere to live." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You have your health, Patty," I said. "Well, most of it. You can work. I hear the motel is hiring maids. You already know the layout." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the sterile hallway of the courthouse. It was the last time I ever saw her face. Gary did not fare as well. He never made it to court. He checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice 3 days after the surgery, desperate to disappear before his creditors found him. But you cannot run far on legs that have been flayed open, and you certainly cannot run from the kind of people Gary owed money to. I heard the news from a buddy of mine in the police force. They found Gary in a ditch outside of San Antonio. He was alive, but just barely. His legs were broken in multiple places. It looked like someone had taken a baseball bat to his kneecaps. The police ruled it a mugging gone wrong, but everyone knew the truth. It was a message. He was currently in a charity ward in a hospital 3 counties over. He would never walk properly again. He would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, living in the shadows, terrified of every knock at the door. He had gambled with his life and lost everything. The $50,000 I had lent him, the trust I had given him, it was all gone, washed away in a river of pain and fear. With the divorce finalized and the parasites removed from my life, I turned my attention to the house, the sprawling brick home in the suburbs that I had built with my own hands. It was a beautiful structure. Solid foundation, oak beams, imported tile. But now every room felt tainted. The kitchen where she had lied to me about the seminar. The bedroom where I had found the red panties. The garage where I had mixed the epoxy. It was not a home anymore. It was a crime scene of memories. I called a real estate agent. Not Gary's agency, obviously. I called the most ruthless shark in town and told her I wanted it sold immediately. "Sell it furnished," I told her. "I do not want the sofas. I do not want the bed. I do not want the curtains. Sell it all." The market was hot. We had a cash offer in 3 days. A young couple from California, tech money, looking for a place to raise their kids. They walked through the house with stars in their eyes, talking about painting the nursery and planting a garden. They saw a future where I only saw a past. On the day of closing, I went back to the house one last time. It was empty now. The staging furniture was gone. My personal items were packed in the truck. The house echoed with the hollowness of a drum. I walked through the rooms. The sun was streaming through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I walked into the master bathroom. The counter was bare. The medicine cabinet was empty. There was no sign of the gym bag, no sign of the pill bottles, no sign of the woman who had lived there for 20 years. I stood in the center of the living room and listened. I listened for the ghost of her laughter, or the sound of her heels on the floor. But there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the house. It was strange. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel a sense of loss. After all, I had spent a third of my life in this house. But as I looked around at the blank walls, I did not feel grief, I felt relief. It was a physical sensation, like a heavy weight being lifted off my chest. For years, I had been walking on eggshells, trying to please a woman who could not be pleased, trying to buy affection that was never for sale. I had been living with a tumor that was slowly draining the life out of me. And now the tumor was gone. It had been cut out, cauterized, and thrown away. I took the pen out of my pocket and signed the final page of the sale documents. I left them on the kitchen island for the agent. I placed the keys next to the papers. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me for the last time. I did not look back. I walked down the driveway to my old Ford truck. The engine rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound. I checked the rearview mirror. The house stood there, imposing and grand. But it was just a pile of bricks and wood. It was not me. I put the truck in gear and drove away. The neighborhood blurred past me. The manicured lawns, the mailboxes, the life I had lived for 2 decades. It all faded into the distance. I reached the highway and turned west. The road opened up in front of me, stretching out toward the horizon. The sky was a brilliant blue, the Texas sun shining down on the asphalt. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that tasted of gasoline and freedom. The nightmare was over. The cleanup was done. The wreckage had been cleared away. I learned that a marriage built on lies is like a house on a cracked foundation. It is destined to collapse no matter how much paint you put on it. For years, I mistook my passivity for patience, allowing them to view my kindness as weakness. But true dignity lies in knowing when to stop giving and when to start protecting what is yours. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let traitors face the full, brutal consequences of their own actions. Freedom is never given. It is taken back one calculated step at a time. If you enjoyed watching the plans of the wicked get stuck literally, please hit that like button to make this old contractor smile. Subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss my next story. And tell me in the comments, do you think I went too far with the epoxy? Or was it the perfect punishment? I will be reading your thoughts below.